Welcome to M.O.P classroom. This is Dr. Kiran Durga Priyadarshini from BA Economics program, here to present you a topic on price and output determination under monopoly. The contents over here to be covered are monopoly, the definition and the examples which will be discussed, and then the features of monopoly, and then why price determination in monopoly market is important, average revenue and marginal revenue curves relationship, firms short-run equilibrium in the concept of monopoly, and the final bird's eye view conclusion. When you talk about the monopoly market, there are different types of markets in an economy. So, when you talk about the monopoly market situation, it is the single seller in the whole market situation, where he is the only person who has the price and the output determination in the whole supply chain management. When you talk about the examples of monopoly, the best example and the oldest example is always all about the railways, where the railways always has a monopoly function. When you talk about the different types of monopoly, we also have something called as the natural monopoly situation, where when we take something called as the online retailing marketing, where we talk about the Amazon, and under the Amazon where you have this prime service, it is the natural monopoly concept. The monopoly is always the single seller in the market and there are more buyers. It can be more buyers, and that's why there needs to be a price and output determination, where there is also going to be a price discrimination in the market, as he is the monopoly seller in the market. Now looking into the features of monopoly, he is a single seller in the person. In the market, there is no close substitute and there is barriers to entry, and it is a perfect knowledge. When you talk about the single seller, he is the sole proprietor or the sole seller in the market situation. There is no close substitute. Why there is no close substitute? He always restricts each and everybody into the market situation. So there comes the concept of barriers to entry. The other market persons or the person who wants to be the natural monopoly, they will think a lot before entering into a market situation. He always has a perfect knowledge how to do a price and output determination in the market situation. Price determination in monopoly market is important. First thing is all about in the both the sides, one from the individuals and also in the business, it has an evaluation of the market behavior. When you look into deep into the concept of the price determination, first every market or for any person, the first aim of the business is to do a maximization of the profit, and then he being the market behavior or the influencer of the economy, he wants to influence on the market conditions, and then he has something called as a price discrimination in the market. When you talk about the railways, you have different classes of tickets, for example, and you also have something called as an 2 AC tire, and you have an 1 AC tire and 3 AC tire, that is a sleeper class. For each and everybody, there is a price discrimination for the same travel what we do in the concept of railways. The same way, when you talk about the regulatory consideration, he is well aware of the government interventions which is going to be on his market behavior situations. When we talk about the monopoly concept, price and output determination, we also need to know about the cost and the revenue concept. So, when we look into the relationship of the cost and the revenue concept, we need to the basics of the marginal revenue and also the average revenue table calculation. Over here, there is a set of price which is being given as in the rupees, and then you have some of the quantity, and then you have something called as the TR, which is the total revenue, and then you have something called as the MR, which is the marginal revenue, and the last column B to be the average revenue. When you talk about the relationship between the marginal revenue and the average revenue concept, the marginal revenue and the average revenue, it is being determined by the total revenue concept. See, for example, the total revenue in the table will be a given concept. So, the first unit is all about the 0 and followed by 5, 8, 9, 8 and 5. When you talk about the marginal revenue concept, marginal, it is nothing but the additional unit which is being gained between the total revenue of the second unit term subtracted by the total revenue of the first unit term. 5 minus 0 becomes the 5, 8 minus 5 becomes the 3, 9 minus 8 becomes 1, 8 minus 9 becomes minus 1, and 5 minus 8 becomes minus 3. When you talk about the average revenue is nothing but the total revenue divided by the quantity. So first initially you will have 5, and then the total revenue is 8 divided by 2 is 4, and then 9 divided by 3 is 3, 8 divided by 4 is 2, and 5 divided by 5 is 1. This is how is the derivation or the relationship of the marginal revenue and the average revenue, which is being determined in the monopoly market situation. When you talk about the curves of the average revenue and the marginal revenue curves, the average revenue curve is always the above the marginal revenue curve. That is, the marginal revenue is always below the average revenue curve. Why the marginal revenue curve is always below the average revenue curve? Because the average or the total revenue curve, it becomes the complete price and output determination curve or the demand curve in the concept of monopoly situation. When you talk the pricing concept under the monopoly, we have something called as the two things which needs to get the satisfaction. One thing is all about the equilibrium point, and the second one is all about the profit maximization. When we talk about the equilibrium of a firm, the equilibrium of a firm or the market situation, it is attained by the two conditions. One is MC equals MR. Marginal cost curve is equaling to the marginal revenue curve, and when the slope of the MC curve is greater than the slope of the MR curve at the point of intersection. From this we will be deriving the equilibrium point, and from where we will be attaining the price and output determination. Then when we talk about the profit maximization and the price and output concept, we also need to know on what time duration or under the what type of conditions this equilibrium is being attained. There is a time duration for the short run and also for the long run period. When you talk about the short run equilibrium, there are three conditions or three different types of profit which is earned or incurred by the market person. One is all about the normal profit, and another one is the supernormal profit, and the next one or the last one is the loss. How do we derive this normal profit, supernormal profit and losses? When you talk about the normal profit, the cost equals the revenue. That is the average cost equals the average revenue. When you talk about the supernormal profit, the revenue is more than the cost. That is the AC is lesser than the AR, or the AR is greater than the AC. When you talk about the loss situation, the cost is more than the revenue. Whenever I am going to do a production for a product, and if my price is not going to be equal or it is not going to be determined in the case of an higher aspect, then my cost is lesser, then it becomes a loss to a firm. So there is AC is greater than the AR. Look into the concept or the figure of normal profit. We need to have two curves. One is going to satisfy the marginal cost and the marginal revenue, and there is also an extra curve which is something called as the average cost and the average revenue. Look into the concept with the base of the demand curves, what has been discussed in the earlier slides. It's just AR is the above, and then MR is below the AR curve, and then when you talk about the MC, the equilibrium condition, AC should cut AR and MC cuts MR curve. Check with the intersection points. There is an AC curve which is actually intersecting the AR curve in the above, and then when you talk about the MC curve, it is intersecting the MR curve at point E. Over here, PEQO will become the normal profit for a market situation or for a market person as a monopolist. When you talk about the supernormal profit concepts, over here also we have the same curve which is the average cost and the average revenue, and also the marginal cost and the marginal revenue curves. How do we consider something as the supernormal profit? When the determined price, or when I am going to have a cost which is being incurred for a product, that is more, the price is more than the cost, it becomes the supernormal profit. Take the figure example. Over here, the average revenue curve is above and the marginal revenue curve is below, and then the equilibrium intersection cut of the 2 points. One is the marginal cost and then the average cost. There are two places where both the curves are getting intersected. Check, the average revenue curve is getting cut or intersected by the average revenue curve, and then the marginal revenue curve with that of the marginal cost. When you look into this picture, OP becomes the price, OP ash becomes the cost which is being incurred by the monopoly person. So this is the portion, or like the two intersections which is being extended to the point Q, which becomes the output level of the person which needs to be determined in the market situation. So thus, how a person is actually attaining a supernormal profit? The OP ash becomes the cost and OP is the price. So this portion becomes your supernormal profit. When you talk about the loss situation, the cost is more than the revenue. So the average cost or the marginal cost is more than the revenue. The cost, whatever I have incurred for my product, and then when I am going to fix a price, it should be more in order to give me a maximized utilized profit for the income of an individual or for the market person. So over here the same curves are there. One is the average revenue and the marginal revenue, and then the marginal cost and the average cost curve. When you talk about the average cost curve, the cost curve is actually intersecting above the AR curve, and then when you talk about the marginal cost, it is actually intersecting with the MR. When the MC equals MR, there is a line which is getting extended and there is a OQ level of output which is being determined in the market. In this situation, the OP is the price, OP ash is the determined cost which is incurred for the product. So thus P ash BA is the portion which is the loss situation for a market. This is only in the situation of short run equilibrium. When you talk about the long run equilibrium, all the AC curves, AR, MC and MR curves should be equal in the long run equilibrium. For that, we will just have a detailed explanation in the next videos. So thank you one and all. Like, share and subscribe for more interesting videos on MOP Classroom. Thank you.